Hey everybody, it's Peter, and this one's going to be interesting. What we have in front of us here is the Suzuki DR-Z, or because I'm filming in Canada, DR-Z, but nobody's going to call it that, 4SM, the Supermoto. And I have KTM's basically direct competitors to this bike, but this bike is significantly cheaper than that bike. And that raises questions because I want to see where the savings are and I want to see which bike is best for you. So what we're going to do in this review is not so much look at all the specific specs of the bikes, because a lot of that is actually fairly similar. What we're going to look at is the components, seating position, dash, some of the things that you see and feel as a rider to help you decide which one is best for you. But if you're on a budget, you kind of got to consider this one, because like I said, this one is around $9,000 Canadian. This one is just over, actually it's almost $12,000 Canadian. That's a big chunk of change for bikes that are kind of similar. So what we're going to do in this review is go over front to back, and I can do that thanks to McLain's. If you have questions here about any of these motorcycles or any of these brands, I get to review all kinds of motorcycles, and McLain Sports is absolutely awesome. They give me riding reviews, they give me static reviews like this. Almost anything I want, they let me do, and that's just awesome. So give them a like, follow to the end if you want to help my channel out. If you can just watch a few videos you like, watch them to the end, that helps me grow. The more I grow, the more I can get people like McLain's to help me do more and more. All right, let's get going with this review. So I want to be clear, I very much like Suzuki as a brand. A lot of their bikes, to me, are top of class, and pricing-wise, they're actually fairly competitive here in Canada. For instance, the Honda Transalp in the States is less expensive than Suzuki's version of that, which is their 800cc V-Strom, excuse me. But in Canada, those are closer in price. So in the States, they're farther apart. In Canada, they're closer in price. So here in Canada, we often end up with bikes in certain classes in the same pretty much exact price class, but these ones are different, and that's what strikes me as odd, because one of the complaints here in Canada is that this bike has gone up in price since they basically modernized it. Now you do get a lot, you get drive modes, you get improved internals and that kind of thing, but you still have a 5-speed, you still have a fairly basic bike, and it is a big jump. It is now compliant with worldwide emission standards. That's part of the reason you lost the carburetor, went to fuel injection, but that bike's sitting right there as well, and in this case at McLain's, it's literally next to it in the showroom. So we're going to have a real comparison here, talking about, is this one worth more for you? And like for some people, they're going to say, hey, Suzuki is a brand, that's a brand I want to trust, and that's fine. If KTM is the brand that you're used to and that's what you want, that's fine as well. But component for component, it's a little questionable for me. So what we're going to do is start at the front, work our way to the back of both bikes, and help you decide which one's best for you. So let's start here with the Suzuki. I always start at the front wheels of a bike because you can tell the manufacturer's intent when you look at this. And this is kind of interesting to me because you would have the traditional stuff. First of all, Supermoto is basically a dirt bike converted to a street bike, and it's all about sport and fun. So you have the spoked wheels still, but they're on a 17-inch rim. That 17-inch rim allows you to have basically any sport bike tire you want. And unlike in the past, sometimes bikes in this price class, sometimes the bikes in this general class overall, they cheap out on tires, but you've got decent Dunlop Sport Max Q5A, which are fairly new tires from Dunlop, decent quality, and kind of what I would expect to see on a bike like this. If you were to buy it, that's probably what you would want to put on it. That would make sense to me. You've got a large floating disc caliper here, so large caliper, lots of venting in there. Again, a road bike brake, not a dirt bike brake. That's one of the things that people forget, is it's not just the tires and wheels that are different, the brakes are different as well. So this is typical stuff. The suspension is upside down suspension. It is adjustable. That's all good stuff. That's what you would want in a Supermoto. So that's the Suzuki. One thing worth noting, this is a 120 wide tire. That is the same size width of tire that you would have on any superbike tire. So a lot of options in tire size here. Let's compare that to the KTM. So taking a look at the KTM, you have a couple things just stylistically. You've got the brake on the opposite side. So I'm showing you the same size of the, or same side of the tire, but the brake is on this side on this case. That's just a choice that KTM makes. That's fine. Again, single disc on both these bikes. You got upside down suspension, fully adjustable. We'll talk about that in a second. The tire on this is a little bit thinner. It's a 110. So you see that on things like the, Yamaha does it on the R3, the Ninja, Kawasaki Ninja does it on the 500. 500 series, so a little bit narrower tire. We're going to talk about that in a second, but you have Michelin tires here, Michelin Power 6 tires. Now I just rode the Duke 390 on these tires, and these are overkill tires for a bike like this. In other words, better than it needs, and these are ZR rated tires. They really are an uprated tire over what Suzuki offers you, which is a little strange to see on the less expensive bike. But again, a little bit narrower, hey, we can give it a wash, that kind of thing. We're going to talk about tire sizes and what that does to affect the bike in a second, but we'll also talk about the suspension adjustments because they are different in how they interact, and I have a preference for one over the other. You may have a different preference, so we'll talk about that as we go through. But very similar, except for different size tires, a little bit smaller here, a little bit, so same diameter, but a little bit less wide. And you have the suspension's adjustable, but we'll talk about some differences there. And again, higher rated tire there. Quick look at the rear tire. Usually I step to the engine at this point of the video, but I want to show the rear tire as well. Same thing on the Suzuki here. You're going to have the Dunlop tire, of course, matching front and rear. This one is a 140 width, and it's got Nissin calipers. Just want to point that out because I didn't point out the brand of brakes. Let's quickly jump on the KTM. KTM, I didn't point out the brand of the brakes. They use bi-brake calipers, which are by Brembo. It's kind of like their less expensive brand. Some would say those are better. You could make arguments here, there, and everywhere. I'll let you decide which one you want there. The other thing is tire, same, again, matching Michelin Power 6, but this is a 150 tire. So the KTM has a smaller front tire and larger rear tire. The Suzuki has a smaller rear tire and larger front tire as far as width goes. Let's talk about how that affects handling. So this is where we can really get into the weeds on things, because I'm going to say that one thing is better than another thing, but we're talking very minute differences. But let's just talk about that. In general, when you have a narrower tire, you have a more nimble bike. Now, if you have a narrow front, if this one has the wider front tire than this one, so if you have a narrow front tire, in theory that turn-in could be a little bit more nimble. It also can depend on tire shape, it can depend on a lot of things, but they've decided to go with a little bit narrower tire in the front, which probably gives you some front end nimbleness, and you have a little bit wider tire on this one, or sorry, narrower rear tire on here, so it kind of balances out, you could say. It does affect handling. Now, how is a big question mark for a lot of people, but generally narrow tires are nimble, and a 150 is not a wide rear tire, even though 140 is narrower. So both of these bikes have fairly narrow tires, which makes sense for the class. They're gonna wanna be nimble. The benefit of a little bit wider rear tire, in theory, is there's just a smidgen more rubber on the ground. It has a little bit more grip, you could say. Really, that could come down to more tire compound. We're talking minutia details here, but it is worth pointing out that they both have a kind of mix, right? You've got the wider front tire, narrower front tire, the narrower rear tire, the wider front tire. So both these are going after that nimble handling in just a slight bit different way, which is going to be a slight bit different in the handling characteristic. Is it something you're going to notice? Probably not, but it is worth pointing out that there's some differences there. Jumping onto the Suzuki here, taking a look at the engine, you have a just under 399cc engine. It's the 398cc here, and it makes in the 40s-ish of horsepower, and it's a single cylinder, and it has fuel economy. It has fuel injection instead of carburetor, and it's kind of similar to what you have on the KTM. Now, two things worth noticing in this shot. You have a piggyback shock here. I don't believe the KTM does have the piggyback shock. It does have a little bit more fine tuning of the shock adjustment, I think, on the DR-Z based on my knowledge of it, but how that's done is going to matter to you. We'll talk about that in a second. So, single cylinder engine, fairly modern. You also have drive modes added this year, which is nice, A, B, and C, which Suzuki uses their own term, but I like to sort of go aggressive, balanced, and conservative, or aggressive, balanced, and chill, whatever you want to do with that. That's A, B, and C with Suzuki. But you also have some of that on the KTM. Let's talk about that. So KTM is very specific about the displacement, 398.7. It's, again, just a smidgen under 399, so these engines are almost the exact same size. Now let's talk about a couple differences. You got fuel injection, you got that kind of thing. The differences that I'm seeing really is in the transmission and the drive modes. Now the transmission on this one is what a lot of people wanted on the Suzuki. This is a 6-speed transmission. The Suzuki only has a 5-speed transmission. That may or may not make a difference to you, but in general, on a smaller displacement bike, having a little bit extra gearing is a good thing. So you do have a little bit extra gearing. You have an extra gear on the KTM here. Now I do want to talk about the suspension as well. The rear suspension, if we zoom in, is adjustable through a tool there. I don't know if you can see the center of your screen. We can like lose some clarity and go right in there at the bottom of the screen there. You can see the center of your screen-ish. That is adjustable. It is to be adjusted by tools. Whoops, let's just come back out here if we can. We'll try to get it set on the correct mat. But anyways, the rear suspension is adjustable by tools. The front suspension is not adjustable by tools on the KTM. It is on the Suzuki. So we're going to show you that in a second. But first, I want to show you riding position on these bikes. So when we talk about riding position, both of these bikes are designed from a dirt bike for a reason. One of the things you're going to look for in a riding position is the ability to move forward and back on the seat. And both of these bikes do have seats that come quite a bit forward. So let's hop on the Suzuki here and we'll just sort of take a look. I'm about 6 feet tall, proportional 6-footer. And what we have here is I can almost flat foot in the shoes that I'm wearing, but not quite. These have a little bit of a higher heel. They're running shoes, probably higher than my riding shoes. But again, not quite. So general seating position, I find the seat firm. That's what you're going to find on a lot of Supermotos. Obviously the ability to move forward, move back is there. When I'm sitting in sort of the comfortable position, there's my squared off position that you can sort of see, foot on the brake, and that's kind of the position. Mirrors are pretty good here. They're well placed out. I can see a little bit of my forearm, but again, for the class, just fine. Sometimes you want them inside of your bars just in case you drop a bike like this. That's part of what these plastics are all about. They can handle the drop. So there's your seating position on the DR-Z. Hopping across to my friend the KTM. Interesting that I'm using DR-Z, which is the model name and everything else. This one feels lower. My feet, I'll put the kickstand a little bit out of the way. My feet, whoops, are on the ground flat on these shoes, and seating position is similar. The mirrors, I would say, are probably, maybe they are just as good. I'd say they're maybe not as good. There's actually less forearm in there and they're circular mirrors, so maybe they are out just the way a seating position is. I would say you probably can't move as far forward on this, but I don't know that you would want to. I feel like I'm already a little bit more forward. Foot on the brake, you can kind of see the same position there. And again, lots of room to move around. To me, this bike feels, maybe because it's lower to the ground, it does have a lighter type feel a little bit. It certainly feels a little bit more compact. It's a little bit less intimidating to me. So take that for what it's worth. It probably has a little bit less suspension. I haven't checked that out to be exactly suspension travel. I don't know if that matters in the super or in the Supermoto category as much as it would in an off-road category. So you can decide if that's what you want by checking out the websites. All right, the dashes are also different. Let's take a look at them now. So starting with the Suzuki here, we take a look at the dash as we zoom in here. You do have an LCD display here. It says go, I assume. And you have your gear indicator on the left here in the neutral. You've got your odometer down low. Traction control, you can see if it's on or off. So you got traction control on here, which is nice to have. Off-road ABS, you can just turn that on or off with a button. Again, very nice to have. Something more dirt bike specific, I think, than Supermoto. I think a lot of you will probably keep the ABS on, especially if you're newer riders. But obviously you want to slide that rear wheel out, you can have that. So again, easy to access. Again, that's sort of the dirt bike roots of this bike. Drive modes there, you've got the A, so you've got A right now. We'll switch down to B, we'll switch down to C. As you can see, that's easy to do. We're gonna go back up and put that. So there's G for gravel on the traction control, and then you got traction control off, 1, 2, just 2, excuse me, I thought there was 3, but that's the way it is. So we'll leave the traction control in that area. We got cycle through the bottom here, you got fuel efficiency, that kind of thing. So lots of information in here. I would argue maybe a little less pretty than it could be, but you know, it is what it is. I will say Suzuki's system of adjusting things is very simple. One thing I should just point out, ignore fuel efficiency. This is a dealership bike, it's been idling, it's been doing other things, so whether it's good or bad to you, it's not really relevant. But again, this is sort of the big advancement in this bike, right? The traction control modes, the driving modes, that's kind of one of the things you see. I will say the LCD display is very clear, but as we move away from the dash, you're gonna see a couple other things that I kind of like, and I'm not sure if I like. So let's just kind of, excuse my camera work, I should have probably stopped and gone to a new cut, but we're just gonna keep rolling right through. Jumping through here, you can see that suspension there. So again, it is adjustable, but it's adjustable with tools. Both fork tubes look the exact same, so you need to carry a tool to play with that. I think it's worth pointing out because it's a Supermoto. To me, you would want adjustments, but having the tool adjustment is sort of standard practice for the industry. KTM does something different, which I kind of like. All right, let's check at the controls. You know what, we'll just keep the same cut again. This is not the way we want to do things normally, but that's what we're doing today. So typical standard controls, you got your high beams on like that. You do have an LED high beam and low beam light. This is the easy controls from Suzuki. I won't go through exactly how that works, but I can tell you that this is quite easy. Drive modes, different dash things, very simple to use. They use this on a number of their bikes. And then signals and horn there, kill switch, and there is a 4-way flasher on the far side. So that's worth pointing out. Let's take a look and compare it to the KTM now. So taking a look at the KTM's dash, this is similar in size, maybe not exactly the same, but they're similar, both small dashes, that's what you'd expect. It starts orange and then it starts cycling through. Now we're gonna see if we can fix some of that flickering and flashing, because that is only happening with a camera. If we come out a little bit, can we fix that? Okay, we can't. We could probably get this on the right angle and get it exactly right, but the point is, ignore the flickering, because that is something that you don't see in real life. What you do see is a crystal clear LCD display with white, bright green, I don't know if that'll show up perfectly, all these bright yellows here. You've got all the things that you would want, and you can see this is in a sport mode right now. Now we can cycle through the sport mode by going into the ride mode. You only have sport and street, so you only have 2 modes on this one, whereas the Suzuki has 3, but you can customize what sport is, essentially giving you the variety of ride modes. So yes, you do need to customize sport to make it the way you want, but it does give you, instead of ABC ride modes, it gives you a sport and a street, but the customizable street right there as well. So then you have traction controls in sport and supermoto right now, which means your rear ABS is off. You have ABS and traction control, all that kind of thing. There's a configuration of sport if we want to do that. So it tells you ABS is off. I don't know if you can see that. That's a red line there. Let's just zoom back in again. I know it's flickering for you, but I'm hoping you can just trust that this is clearer in person. Coming back out here, we'll come back out. There's a lot of things in here. Through an app, you can add navigation to this. Again, that's what you get with a TFT display. I wouldn't really do that through the app. In general, they're not as good, but there is a USB port right here. Mount your phone down here, whatever you want to do. You can have a navigation through that if you wanted to. So you do have a little bit extra in the display there, in my opinion. Now you could argue the ride mode is one less. You could argue some different things. Traction control mode may be a little different rather than just sort of an on or off, that kind of thing. But I don't know that you lose a whole lot for real rideability on this, even though this bike is cheaper. So let's just take a look at the suspension and the controls on this bike as well. I am going to cut this time just to make it a little simpler. Taking a look under the handlebars here, red is rebound adjustment, white is compression adjustment. So red rebound, that should be easy to remember, but these are done with just regular clickers that you can move by your hands instead of with tools. And what that means to me is I think most people are going to be able to adjust it and probably will start tinkering with their suspension, which means you're going to learn your suspension if you're going to be able to tinker with it on the fly, go over the same section of road, remembering what it's all like, not having to pull out tools. So personally, I like the ability to adjust things on the fly. Like I said, the Suzuki probably has possibly a little bit better suspension as far as amount of adjustments and everything else, but you're going to get almost everything that here, and you're going to probably actually use the adjustments because you can figure out what it does. Now, jumping over here to the controls, we're going to zoom in just a little bit to try to get that sunshine out. Oh boy, can we do that? Hopefully you can see enough there. You have a little remote control joystick type thing here. Up, down, left, right, up, that kind of thing. I can turn the bike off so I don't go through the things. But yeah, very easy to click, very positive. You got signals and horn. The headlight system works the exact same way as the Suzuki. On the far side, you have a kill switch, but you do not have the hazard warning lights that you do have on Suzuki. So that's one thing worth noting. Now, in exchange for that, you actually have a brake lever and a clutch lever that are adjustable over here. So you do have full adjustability on your levers, where the Suzuki does not have that adjustability. One thing worth noting here, we are on the Suzuki, but both the Suzuki and the KTM do have gear shift levers that can fold out of the way if the bike was dropped. So it's not something that's just going to break if it's dropped. That is worth pointing out, because that's the kind of thing that you may discover on this bike depending on how you're riding it, or if you're taking it to a track and want to give things a go. Just worth pointing out that it does have some dirt bikey type stuff that is kind of helpful for a bike of this class. So let's talk about which one of these bikes is best for you. Now, one thing I want to point out is a lot of people say, oh, X bike outsells Y bike, and that can be for a whole lot of reasons. In the car world, if you live in a small town, you probably have a Ford and Chevy dealer in your town. You may not have a Jaguar dealer in your town, for instance. So there's always dealer availability, stuff like that. That can play a role into things. KTM has had its financial struggles in the past. It is my belief, and based on everything I'm reading, that they are well beyond that. They have taken care of that. So there was a sort of a lack of bikes available for them for a while. You can talk about reliability and other stuff too, and that's really where Suzuki goes in all in. When they redesigned this, they basically took the same engine, and there's a lot of parts changed in this engine, but there's a lot that's also the same. And this bike was incredibly reliable before it went to a fuel injection with the ride modes and everything else, so I would expect that to happen here. Now again, this 399cc engine has been pretty good for KTM as well. The difference with sales figures is I do think this bike will outsell that. I even think this bike will outsell that potentially here at McLean's. And the reason I think that is because if you want to get into the category of this bike here, you have this bike from Suzuki. That's it. This bike, there's an adventure bike, there's a dirt bike, there is a dirt bike of that, but there's an adventure bike here, which is also a road going bike, you could say. There is the Duke 390, the RC 390, and this, which all share the same engine. So I do think if you're liking the KTM, you have to consider, is this style of sportiness your style, or is the RC 390 your sporty style, or is the Duke your sporty style? And for that reason alone, I think you have more on-road options with this basic configuration than you do with Suzuki, which basically offers this and the dirt bike version of this. So sales numbers alone aren't going to tell you the whole story. I know from riding the Duke 390 engine that it is a very enjoyable engine. The question is, would I buy this bike? I'm not sure. I do think Suzuki is probably justified in their higher price in some of the things you don't see. It is possible that their suspension is a little bit higher spec. It is possible that some of the components in the engine are a little bit higher spec. They really talk about the fine machining of all of the features in their engine, and it is possible that this bike is a little bit higher spec. But in some of the things that you touch and feel, tires, I would argue possibly brakes, certainly the dash, adjustable levers and that kind of thing, this bike really does give you more, and certainly more for the money. So you have to decide, is the Suzuki best for you? Is the KTM best for you? If you want to keep some money in your pocket, it's hard to go against the KTM. However, this bike has been legendary for years for a reason. Will it remain legendary with the modern updates to it? That's for you guys to decide, and that is my basic review of these bikes. So if you have any questions, feel free to let me know again in the comments, and if you made it this far, do me a favor, leave a like, leave a positive comment. I appreciate it. We'll talk to you in the next one.